So today we're going to talk about interviews with the hiring manager. Last video I guess we did was an interview with HR. This is typically a screening process. And then after you pass that, you'll have this interview with a hiring manager, someone who actually does this for a living, probably your potential boss or somebody in a similar position. So again, just the basics, right? Have the phone in a location where you can hear them. There's not a lot of background noise. You have good phone service. Have your resume in front of you, whether it's on a computer or on paper, so that when they reference a specific line or a question, you know exactly what they're looking at and you can answer it. And I would also either print out a copy of the job description, or I would review it one more time before the interview, so you should know what's going to be asked, what topics are going to be on the interview schedule, basically. And then, you need to prepare for this interview. So if you know somebody at the company, definitely call them up, say, hey, I've applied to this position. I'm going to be interviewing with so-and-so. Could you tell me a little bit about them? And also, do you know a little bit about what this job requires? Also, you could go on LinkedIn if you don't know anybody, and you can look these people up. So typically in the last interview with HR, you asked what the next steps were, or you'll get an email in the meantime saying, hey, you're interviewing with, Dr. So-and-so, or Mrs. this, or Mr. that. And so look them up on LinkedIn, figure out their educational background is, look for similarities, see what they have on their LinkedIn profile for what they've done. So maybe they specialize in like logistic regression. Make sure you research that and know what you're looking at. So again, do your homework on them. Also do your homework on the job position. So if you're applying for a job, let's say C++ programmer, for example, make sure you know what you're looking at. Make sure you review it. You might have a computer science degree and you can do all kinds of programming, but they might ask you something specific like, can you explain the difference between like a pointer and a reference in C++? Again, you can tell C++ is not my strong suit here, but they're going to ask detailed questions like, have you used Boost Library? Or, for statistics, have you done time series analysis? Or have you done logistic regression? Can you explain to me how to do this? So be able to cover the basics on what you're interviewing for. Make sure you know the basics of like, this is how you would build a model. This is exactly how I would test for it. If this went wrong, then what would you do? So I've had a few interviews on model development, model implementation, model validation, internal audit, and they're all typically the same on, we have this data, this happens, how would you build the model? You walk them through it, then they throw a wrench at you of like, okay, you've done all this testing, this test failed, then what would you do? So I wouldn't spend a lot of time in like anguish on trying to make sure everything's covered, but really know the basics for the job title. If they mention that you need to know R, make sure you can answer a few questions about R. If they mention like statistical modeling, make sure you can answer about that. If it's marketing analytics and you've never done marketing, just research a little bit about marketing, but then be honest with them in the phone interview and say, hey, like, yeah, I've never done marketing, but to answer your question on how I would model like, I don't know, average web duration for visitors, I would model it using this type of model and this is why. So kind of think through the process and what they're going to ask you and make sure you kind of review all the knowledge you know, because you might know this really, really well, but you might be really nervous and forget it. And so it's important to kind of like grease the wheels basically and make sure that you've reviewed all your material. So this part of the interview process is pretty important. Again, do not cover compensation and salary. This will typically be negotiated and done on the last final in-person interviews, or HR might just send you an email and say, hey, this is the offer we're giving you. Do you like it or not? Then that's the time to say yes or no. I don't think it's enough compensation. But again, don't bring it up at this point. You just need to pass the gates, check in with the people. And I would also be prepared to ask questions. They don't want to just lecture you because it's really, really boring when you call somebody for a job interview and like, you're the one just talking and talking and talking, and they just give you like these really short feedback. Have questions for them, because typically, you'll go through this dialogue and they ask questions, you give them kind of an answer, you give them some details, so it looks like you know what you're talking about, and then at the end of it, they're going to ask you, do you have any questions? Or they're going to say, oh, hey, like, that's it. And then you might have to bring up, hey, I had a question on, you mentioned that you guys use logistic regression. Have you guys ever considered using other types of modeling? Why do you guys use that? Try to ask it if some questions and at least have 2 or 3 questions ready. So at the end, you can ask 1 or 2 questions. They'll answer them. They'll feel like you're paying attention, you're interested in the job, and then you can say, okay, thank you for your time. The phone call will end and the pleasantries are done. And again, if you have their email, I would send them a quick email afterwards, maybe half an hour to an hour. You know, dear so-and-so, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And then be done. But if you don't have their email address, you can also email HR and ask if you can have their email address to send a thank you letter. If they don't provide it for you, I wouldn't stress out about it too much. Be prepared. Sometimes you might have 2, 3, 4 people on a phone call. It's not real common, but I've also had phone calls where there's like 2 people on the line, and either I did know it, and so I prepared and researched both people, or I didn't. So just be prepared for that. That's kind of the process I would go through with interviewing with a hiring manager. So thanks for your time. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like, share, and to subscribe for more career videos.